Hey Darren, nice to see you again.
Hey, it's great to see you, Donna. How are you doing?
Awesome. It was so nice meeting you after your show at Spaghettini's in Seal Beach. Man, that was, I got to be honest with you, that really was one of the best shows I've ever attended. Your stage presence,
Oh,
the audience energy, it was just really fantastic.
thank you so much. That was a fun night when we had such a great. The band was great, had a great crowd, and when all those ingredients come together, it makes for a good time.
Absolutely. And I'm gonna be talking more about that in a little bit. What I wanted to start off asking you was, I guess, a basic question, but who are your biggest influences on the saxophone?
Wow, I have so many, but probably the guys that really influenced me the most in terms of just developing my own sound, I would say Stanley Turntine,
Oh, yeah.
Michael Brecker, John Coltrane, and moving forward into modern stuff, guys like Grover Washington, and then of course David Sanborn, Kirk Whalum, and Gerald Albright. These are kind of the staples of guys that I listened to growing up. But I listened to everything. I mean, even going back into a lot of straight ahead stuff. Dexter Gordon, I love Dexter's sound.
Yeah.
So as a tenor man, I tend to kind of uh, favor the great tenor players, but I play all the horns, and I love good sound.
And the thing is too, when I heard you and we spoke about this after your show, yeah, you've got a great sound. And I was thinking as I was listening to you, because I know you're from British Columbia and you live in Denver, yet you've got a
Uh-huh.
New York sound, and I know that because I'm from New York. And I said to
Yeah.
you, yeah, you've got that New York sound, and I remember you mentioned something about like that Saturday Night Live kind of influence in
Oh,
your sound.
sure. I mean, there's no doubt about that. I mean, the New York tenor sound was the sound that I was into when I was developing, and yeah, I mean Michael Brecker and Bob Mincer, but even I mean guys like Bob Malik, and even some modern guys like my friend Andy Snitzer. Um, I always liked that kind of really heartfelt. They weren't trying to hide anything. They weren't trying to be too smooth. They weren't trying to be too cool. They were letting it all out, and that nice kind of angular, some of that angular. Lines and stuff they play. I really dig that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's typical New York. We say it as it is.
Exactly. Right.
And it
Right.
comes out in the sound too. And actually, I wasn't going to get into gear, but you know what? Why not? Tell us, tell us what gear you're using.
Well, I'm playing P. Morate saxophones. So I've been playing them for about, gosh, probably 16, 17 years now.
Oh,
And I was one of the first when they first came to the U.S. And I loved them so much I sold my vintage horns. But I'm playing their roll tone hole tenor. The one I played at Spaghettini, that was their new. They call it the 66 RSS, I believe. The Diamante. It's a roll tone hole with it's like a matte silver finish, but it's a hybrid silver plating. So it's not like some of the cheap horns have like a paint. It's not that. It's actually a really good silver plated horn. Before that, I used their vintage lacquer. My alto is a 67R with the vintage lacquer. My soprano is their System 76 Series 2 with the vintage lacquer. So I just love their horns. And then mouthpieces. I'm a Jody Jazz endorser, and I play on tenor. I'm playing his Giant. I work with a couple different mouthpiece companies. Jody Jazz is the main company, so I play the Giant on tenor, and then I also I think my soprano. I've got his new Jet mouthpiece on alto. On
oh,
soprano, I've been on a Brancher, and then every once in a while, I've got a mouthpiece from a Brazilian company called Everton, and I'll use that every once in a while too. But the majority is Jody Jazz pieces, and then Marca Reeds. And then I'll keep some Legiers. They're a great company too. I endorse for both Marca and Legier, and I'll keep some Legiers in the case if I'm having a rough night with reeds, or last week I was on a TV interview and my horn needed to sit for an hour, and I needed to just be able to pick it up right away and play. And So, in circumstances like that, I'll also use the Legiers sometimes.
Yeah, they're all these, all the equipment is just really amazing, and particularly the reeds. We had Aaron Elvey on from Marker Reeds, and we were
Oh
talking
yeah.
about yeah, and he mentioned the story about how and there's this great saxophone player Darren Rahn, and he was in Colorado, and he was looking for reeds, and he tried out the Marker Reeds, and he loved them, and he bought boxes of them, stuff like that.
I've actually been playing Marker for a long time, and I should also mention BG. I use all Frank's ligatures and a lot of his accessories. But the Marca reeds, I started playing Marca in 1988 or 89.
Whoa.
Which might date me a little bit, but when I was coming out of high school going into college, I bought a bunch of reeds for soprano. I bought like 10, 15 different brands, and I like the Marca the best. And so on soprano, I've been playing the Marca reeds since then. And then I bumped into them at the NAMM show maybe 12, 13 years ago, and they offered me an endorsement. And I said, well, that's great, because I already play your soprano reeds. And so I've been playing them for a long, long time.
Yeah, they're great. They're great reeds. I just met them at NAMM this year, and
cool.
Yeah, and they I never played them before, so they sent me some samples, and maybe like 2 or 3. And each one I put on, I'm like, it works. There's something weird here.
Yeah, they're actually working. Yeah, more reeds that play per box than probably any of the other brands that I've tried.
That is true. That is definitely true. And it's a really good company. And I just thought it was very interesting how I met Aaron, spoke about you, and then I got a chance to see you and speak about it, which is really cool.
Oh, that's cool. It's a small world. And I've been playing, my favorite probably right now is their American Vintage. I love that cut. That really works well for me. But I've used almost all the cuts. The Superior, the Excel, their Jazz cut. All great stuff.
Cool. And I have a question for you, because I know you're basically based out of Denver. Okay, so higher altitude, I'm thinking drier.
Yep.
All right, how do you deal? I've had a bunch of people asking me questions about dealing with reeds in especially drier climates, because I live in LA now and it is incredibly dry, but also high altitude. So you would know more about that than I would.
Well, yeah, it's difficult up here. I mean, LA's really easy comparatively, because there is some moisture and you guys are at sea level. But up here, I think the only opportunity you have to really figure it out is just you've got to leave yourself time to mess with reeds. And so I'd say for people that are from sea level and are traveling to high altitude, don't just bring more reeds, bring some softer reeds too. They tend to play a little thicker up here and not as quite as nicely. So I think it's just a lot more picky. So I think having extra reeds, and if you're coming from a low altitude to high altitude, bring some softer reeds too. Vice versa. When I go to sea level, I'll make sure I have some harder reeds with me.
That's interesting, because I was reading your equipment list on your website, and I think you play number 2 reeds for a lot, right? Is it number 2?
2 and 2.5 basically. Just depending on the cut. If it's a thicker cut, I'll be around a 2. If it's a thinner cut, I'd be somewhere around a 2.5. Yeah.
Got it. And
or with the Legiers, which tend to be even thicker, sometimes even 1 3/4.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. Okay. Which do you use the Legier signatures?
Yeah, the Signature series. Yep.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, because I was thinking, as we were just talking right now, maybe you're using a lower number where you live in the high altitude, and then when you come down to a place like LA or something like that, you'd probably use a 2.5 or something to that effect.
Yeah, it's probably about a quarter strength difference between the altitudes. And I don't always have to have different sizes with me. Sometimes I'll just, when you're testing a box of reeds and you find some that are thicker and some that play a little thinner, I'll just separate them, and I'll keep the thicker ones for lower altitudes.
That's really cool, and that's great advice for folks, because reeds. Reeds.
Oh man.
Yeah, reeds.
Yeah, reeds.
I mean, there's so many more choices out there nowadays, and which is great, which is really good. But I'm also really glad that there's so many choices of synthetic reeds out there too. I played Legier for a long time. Fiber reeds are great. Now 4-stone reeds, all these types of things. So we're lucky in that regard because it's been a little dicey with the reeds.
Yeah, I think it's always good. For me, I tend to, I think it's good to have both. I think when you have that great cane reed, I mean, it's like there's nothing better than a great cane reed. But sometimes it can be a long time in between finding those. And I'm fortunate. I think with the marker reeds, like I said earlier, I find a lot more playable ones per box than I would with most other reeds. But I think I think it's good to have a good synthetic ready to go because you never know. You never know, and weather can change. Humidity, all that stuff, it just affects us so greatly. So yeah, we're spoiled these days.
That is true. That is true. And since we're speaking about tone, tell us a little bit about your journey as a saxophone player. Growing up, when you decided you were going to do it full time. Give us the whole introspective. Give us the whole historical perspective from your point of view.
Wow, it's a long story. I'll try to condense it for you.
Okay.
I started doing music when I was quite young. I think piano lessons at 5, and my mom said, "Hey, you can take piano for 2 years, and if you like it, keep doing it. And if you're not digging it, well, she didn't say digging it, but if you don't like it, then you can stop." And so I took 2 years of piano, and I stopped. But then when it came time for band, picking the instruments in band, I decided, I'm gonna give this a shot. And then it was easy because I was playing. I started on clarinet and moved to saxophone, but just playing. I was used to reading treble clef and bass clef on piano, so that kind of made it an easy transition. Just reading single lines on an instrument in treble clef. So saxophone through junior high and high school, I was pretty much self-taught on saxophone, and actually didn't really start taking sax lessons until I started majoring in college in music.
Wow. Now, let me ask you something. Do you feel that start, certainly the piano start probably helped you, but do you feel that the start on clarinet helped your saxophone playing?
I think so, for 2 reasons. First of all, it was much more difficult than saxophone. And so by the time I got to saxophone, it was much easier. And second of all, I didn't really like clarinet. And so that's a whole nother story. The music store conned me into playing clarinet because they said my fingers were too small for sax, my arms were too short for trombone, my parents wouldn't let me play drums, and so music store guy pulls out a clarinet and starts playing Peter and the Wolf. What is that, Prokofiev? And he played it beautifully. And my folks said, "Okay, you're playing clarinet." And so I suffered through those first couple of years on clarinet. So by the time I got to saxophone, not only was it easier, but I was also a lot more motivated because I was enjoying the instrument more too.
Now, this is interesting though, because if you really didn't like the clarinet, yet you stuck with it, that's really interesting.
I love good clarinet. It just wasn't my forte. I think that like some of my favorite sax players are great clarinet players. I mean, you listen to guys like Eddie Daniels or Paquito de Rivera. I loved his sax playing, and of course he's a monster on the clarinet. So I wish I would have been better on clarinet, but I guess it wasn't meant to be.
But it's cool because it gave you that great start, and a lot of the guys that I've been speaking to who are great players actually did start on clarinet because it is it is that much trickier, I would tend to think. Now,
I would agree.
Yeah, definitely. Now, so you didn't really have real formal lessons until you were in college. Who were you studying with in college?
In my undergrad, I studied with a gentleman from the Air Force Falconers in Colorado Springs. I just went to a small school in southern Colorado, so I studied with him mostly and started mostly classical. The jazz was mostly self-taught until I think probably my junior year of college. Another tenor player from the that had been in the Falconers, a great tenor player named Mark Rose. He's just a killer tenor player. He was such a big influence on me. So just getting some of that foundation and stylization, and starting to overcome some of the deficiencies I had in my embouchure and my playing were huge. And then coming into grad school, I studied with Roger Greenberg up at University of Northern Colorado. And Roger, a fantastic saxophone instructor, and even though he's mainly a classical guy. He studied with Joe Ellard, and so I got a lot of that New York instruction in terms of embouchure and wind and air and tone production, and that made a big difference for me.
Absolutely. That's so interesting. So that little Joe Allard connection as well.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting. So let me ask you then, what advice, I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit here, but what advice do you have for folks that, want to improve their tone? What advice could you impart on them based on what you've gone through?
Probably all the stuff they don't want to do. Long tones, and more long tones, but not just long tones. I think understanding the harmonics of the saxophone. So starting to learn about second and third and fourth order harmonics and how that affects our sound. One of the big things for me was a series of matching overtone exercises that Roger Greenberg gave me, and they were based on some things he learned from Joe Allard, where he would take, like, say you're fingering a low B flat, and you would play the octave without using the octave key. You would play the octave, and then you would switch to the, hold a long tone, and while you're holding the long tone, switch to the normal B flat.
Right, this one, yeah.
And try to make the regular B flat as full and big as the all fingers down B flat. And then we would do the same thing with the 3-to-1, with the same fingering, but going from the F overtone, so the third harmonic, which is the F natural above the staff, but by playing the low B flat fingering, doing the long tone on the F, fingering the B flat, and then switching to a regular F fingering and trying to get it to sound as big as the overtone fingering. And there was also some tongue placement stuff that they did there that helped a lot too, in terms of controlling speed and using tongue position to create proper speed for intonation, so that you didn't lose your pitch didn't go crazy when you're centering in on these tunings. So.
Yeah, it's a lot of that. Like you said, those types of exercises nobody wants to do, but when you listen to your favorite players, or when you listen to your favorite players, you've got their sound in your head, and you have an idea of what you want to sound like. It's these types of things that you need to do in order to get there and sound like that.
Yeah, probably the two of the biggest things for me. One day in a lesson, my instructor, he set me on the floor on my back, no saxophone, and just lying flat on my back with my legs together and my arms at my side. And he said, while you're lying in this position with your head all the way back on the floor, just take a deep breath as quickly as you can. And I did. And it's physiologically impossible to breathe incorrectly when you're in that position. So immediately all the air rushed into my lower stomach near my diaphragm. And, he told me, he said, that's where it always needs to be coming from. And there's always this temptation, obviously, to let that air center creep up into our chest and sometimes into our neck. And that changed my sound big time, because I was breathing from the correct spot. Now, with that said, there's a lot of guys, especially in some of these modern genres, that, how you look on stage is so important, that, guys, they don't ever want their stomach to stick out or whatever. And I have to admit that I learned to breathe correctly, so I'm not that guy. I'm kind of an ugly saxophone player when I'm blowing, because it takes a lot of physical energy to do it right. So, kind of is what it is. The second thing was tongue position. It was Roger Greenberg that had talked about saying the vowel he, like he, but stay on the H, he, and the position that your tongue sits in when you say that, the back of your tongue, that creates so much more stable pitch center and airflow. It's like a hose. It's a way of increasing the speed of the air without blowing harder, because when you raise that tongue, it's making the back, between the tongue and the back of the mouth, where the air comes in from your air pipe, it's making it smaller without slowing down it actually speeds up the air when you do that. So that was a game changer for me, because then when I'm blowing loud, I'm not always going flat or sharp, but I'm able to keep that center of pitch. It helped. That was life-changing for me.
It's interesting. I had done some research lately about people that use that that he position.
Mm-hmm.
And so you use that throughout the entire range, low to high.
If I remember to, yeah.
Yeah, okay, I know it's hard on the low notes. I totally get it.
And typically, the more I use that, almost any time I'm having production issues, like if different intervals on the horn aren't skipping right, or even altissimo or low notes not coming out right, probably 9 times out of 10, if I correct that tongue position, and I'm using good air, 9 times out of 10, problem solved. So I try to use it all the time, but probably don't use it all the time.
That's a great tip. Now, I wanted to go back to something you had said before, and also something that I read in your bio on your website. You play all the saxophones. In fact, you did play a little Barry also, I think, in high school from what I read. But you're focusing now on the tenor. Talk to us about that.
Well, there's kind of a couple different reasons. I still do play all the horns, but tenor has always been my main voice. I think as I developed my sound on saxophone, tenor was the horn I spent most time on. Most of the players that I really looked up to were tenor players. And so I spent the most time studying tenor players. And I think in terms of covering a wide range of sounds and emotions and highs and lows, I think tenor is probably the broadest range of all the saxophones in that regard. I think, for me at least. But then the other part of it was traveling. Traveling with saxophones is not so easy these days, and so I kind of hit a point where I had to decide what is my main horn, because unless I'm on a big gig that where they're budgeting for transport and stuff like that. It's difficult to travel with more than one saxophone, or 2 at most. So typically then I was like, okay, well, I'll focus on tenor, and then, if I need to bring a soprano or an alto or whatever, I can always do that.
Yeah, that's been a bone of contention with the traveling. I did a series on my website about that, and you've been talking to a bunch of people, on this podcast and just in general, about traveling and cases and the best cases for doing that. The funny thing, I ran across a guy at NAMM, great player. We did the NAMM jam together, the Leger jam and stuff like that. And he had a Wiseman case. And this case, I looked at him, I'm like, God, that's the thinnest case. You must just have a soprano in there. No, he had a tenor, alto, and soprano in that case.
Wow.
I know, and it was really thin. I couldn't believe it. He opened it up, and they all fit. And, perfectly, everything was well cushioned. It was heavy, though. That case was insanely heavy.
Yeah, I have a, how do you pronounce it, a Hiscox or that English brand. And, the ones they claim, you can have 10 people stand on the case or something, 2,000 pounds or something. And if I'm going somewhere where there's a chance my horn might get checked, and it's a single horn, I'll use that. Otherwise, I've got a big flight case I can put multiple horns in. But for traveling, domestically, I think a good quality compact hard case, 9 times out of 10, I have no problem getting on the plane. So that's my default. Unless I'm international, then I may switch to the other cases.
Got it. Okay, that's great advice. Because like I said, it's been more difficult lately with the airlines and stuff like that, and security, especially in the U.S. and I guess all over the world. So it's great advice for our listeners, folks. So now I'm going to get back to what we were speaking about before, that show at Spagattini's. What really struck me was that you weren't just playing your saxophone. You were entertaining. You were performing. You were getting the audience engaged. And what I really loved that you did was, and most people don't do this, but right from the get-go, you were announcing your band members' names. And you didn't just do it once. You did it often, because a lot of times we're sitting there in the audience, it's like, who's the piano player? I couldn't hear him. He just warbled it. What did he say? I love the fact that you did that.
Oh, thank you. Well, I would be remiss not to. I mean, I'm fortunate to play with some of the best musicians in the world. And I've always had this theory that you surround yourself with people that are as good or better than you. And I tend to try to put musicians around me that supersede my ability level, because it A, I learn from them, and B, it elevates my playing level. And I think this notion of teamwork is so often overlooked these days. And I mean, what would that show look like if it was just me on stage with no band? So I think, yeah, the band should not just get props. I think it's good to give the band time to stretch out, and especially in a format like that. I mean, a jazz club, it's a little bit longer show, and there's some time for some longer solos. So yeah, let the guys cut loose a little bit, and then I can learn something from them.
Yeah, and what was also great about that show, many, many things, you didn't take a break. You were on for definitely more than an hour and a half. It was like more like an hour 45. It was one long set. That was the first time I've seen that happen. That was awesome.
Well, yeah, it was fun. That was fun. Yeah, and once again, back to the guy, the guys in the band. As a solo artist, that's a long time to have a horn on your lips without a break. But when you're surrounded by great band members who also have really good language, you can give them time to do that, and it gives me a little break while they're soloing, and it keeps the audience engaged. That set break is always a point in a gig if you're breaking sets, where you're thinking, gosh, I hope people are digging the show and that they're going to stay. But I found that it's easier once you capture their attention. It's easier to just keep playing and maintain it, than to have to take a break, and then people start ordering more food and drinks, and their mind is off the music, and it kind of changes the dynamic of the gig.
That's really great advice, and I that goes into what I was going to ask you next, which is what tips do you have? Because again, stage presence is huge nowadays. It's Spaghettini's is, if you're not aware of it, it's a great club in Seal Beach. They're undergoing renovations right now. They're going to be making it bigger, which is great because it always gets packed and sold out. And people really appreciate the music there, but that's not always the case, when you're playing. So what other tips do you have for, performing artists to, I guess, boost their stage presence, to capture the audience's attention?
Well, I think first and foremost, you need to make a connection with the audience. So, and I think you need to do it in a way that works for you. In real life, I'm a little more subdued and laid back, kind of chill. On stage, I've had to learn to be a little more animated and create a little more movement than I would naturally. Because I need to make sure that people are engaging with music. With that said, I still think that music is king, and when you can combine both those elements, both the true musicality with good stage presence and music, this I think is ultimately what is most meaningful to an audience. And so I think you got to just find a way to do it that stays true to yourself. Everyone has a different personality, and I think the guys that I enjoy listening to the most on stage are the guys where I really can hear their voice, and when I look at them and I watch them play, it matches. It's not coerced. It's not like an act. It's for real, but it matches their personalities. But at the same time, you're right. You do have to have stage presence. I somewhat miss those old days where you could just pop up in front of a microphone and put your head down and start blowing, and that might be great for as an artist in terms of concentrating and thinking about what you're doing, but I don't think audiences connect too terribly much with that. So, yeah, I think it's good if we can express ourselves and let people see that.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's again, some really, really great advice there. And, reflecting on that show, reflecting on other shows that I've been to, yeah, it's that connection with the audience. And, you said music is king. Absolutely. And I got your CDs right here. Totally. Oh, wow. Yeah, totally awesome stuff. And I love the names of the tunes you come up with, like Altered Ego and Sonic Boom. And I'm like, damn, those are great band names. They really are. You come up with great titles, and I love the music because it's very energetic, and even when you play this beautiful ballad, you knew how to pace the set list, right? And even when you play that beautiful ballad, you had our attention, and it started to kick in a little bit too, and you built the tension and all that kind of stuff. Just really great songwriting. So I wanted to talk about your songwriting process. What is that like for you?
Um, More often than not, I'm a real groove guy. Um,
I could tell. Yeah.
even when I was doing like serious jazz fusion and straight ahead stuff back in the day, whenever I would write, I was approaching the song from a rhythmic perspective, usually first, and then allowing the melody to come after that. Every once in a blue moon, I'd love to claim to be Beethoven or some of these guys that heard symphonies in their head, but that's not the way it works for me. Once in a blue moon, a melody will pop into my head, but usually for me, songs start with a groove and a chord structure. And so I'll figure out a basic groove. I play keyboard too, so I'll sit down at keys and start working different harmonies and chords and chord structures. And then usually from that, the melody evolves and builds and can kind of refine that.
You know what's interesting as you're saying this, I'm thinking to myself, he sounds like a guitar player or a rhythm section player in his songwriting, and yeah, you said
Very much so, very much so. And then the song titles, usually there's some connection to the song. Every once in a while, you know, you just stump for a title and you'll come up with something, but usually they're connected. Like for instance, Altered Ego, that whole song is pretty much all altered dominant chords. So and then the other part of that was, here I am, putting out a CD that kind of contemporary jazz stuff, but I grew up on the more serious like funk and fusion stuff, and so this Altered Ego is kind of harkens back to really my roots, but it's not necessarily like everything else on the record. So it's a play on both the personality of the tune and the altered dominant chords there.
that's awesome. It's a great tune. All the tune, I really, I enjoy listening to your music, and I just remember for myself hearing you on satellite radio and Sirius XM. Hearing your songs there, and just really, you've had so many number ones. What was it, 25 number ones?
As a producer, saxophonist, mix engineer, you add those all together, 25 or 30 number ones. And my tunes, I think in that capacity, somewhere around 15 number one billboards. But as an artist, I've had a couple number ones myself, and a handful of others that have been number one on other charts. But for me, it's just about the music. So I put it out there, and when it does well in the charts, that's icing on the cake. But first and foremost, my hope is that it'll really connect with the listener.
Yeah, and it definitely does, and it's really awesome stuff. So you mentioned producing, and from what I understand, you've been producing for quite some time now. How did you get involved with that?
Well, by accident, actually. I was, I had been chipping away in the music industry after school for 10, 15 years, and I was getting my music out to some different labels and stuff, and like most sax players, it was a hit or miss situation, and a lot of blank promises that never materialized. And one day, I get a call from Dave Koz, and out of the blue, literally out of the blue. And of course, I grew up listening to his music, and he's such a sweet guy, and I really admire his musicianship, his playing, and what he's accomplished in the industry. And he was starting a new record label, and one of his business partners had gotten a hold of something that I had sent out. And so I'm now on the phone with Dave talking, and he wanted me to come to LA and meet them, and so I did. And long story short, they loved my music. They wanted to sign me, but they had just signed another young sax player who also is very well known. And they told me, they said, "We'd really love to sign your CD, but we don't have room on our roster for two brand new artists right now." And so I was kind of devastated. But at the end of that conversation, they said, "Hey, we love your production. Who produced it?" And I told them that I had. And so then they said, "Well, hey, if we had some production work for you, would you take it?" And I said, "Sure." And literally, 2 or 3 days later, I was in their office meeting with Wayman Tisdale, and they had offered for me to produce a radio single for him. And then, what was it? Something like 9 or 10 weeks later, it's number one on Billboard.
Wow.
And I got not only to produce it, I got to play saxophone on it too. And all of a sudden, the phone started ringing. So it was one of those stories of, you work for years and years envisioning it a certain way, and then all of a sudden another opportunity comes out of left field that you didn't expect. So so from that point on, the phone's been ringing for production and mixing, and I've been fortunate to be able to do my artist thing along with that too.
Wow, that's an awesome story. I'm curious, and maybe you could impart some more pearls of wisdom. Although I know you said the producing thing came by accident, but someone coming up in the industry now, okay, it doesn't matter what their age is, because really, and honestly, it could be any age, but they're looking to get involved, being a full-time musician, and maybe that means for them, playing full-time, performing full-time, or something else. What kind of advice do you have for someone today? Because it is probably a lot different than it was in the 90s or even 10 years ago.
I think two or three small things that you can be consistent at. First of all, a great musician once told me, I had asked him for advice years ago, and before any doors opened for me, and he told me, he said, Darren, don't ever look for any big doors to open. So just every time a small door opens, just go through it and do it with excellence. And so that's kind of been my formula. I think aside from that obvious things, be the kind of person that people want to work with. Keep things positive, and be open. Be open to other people's ideas. Let other musicians bring what they bring to the party. Don't have to, it doesn't have to be your way. Exchange phone numbers and return phone calls. Be consistent in that stuff. And I'll have to plead guilty here. In the last few years, sometimes it gets so busy, I actually these days sometimes have a hard time keeping up with emails and phone calls. But it's important, and especially getting established. That's critical. Doing that.
Do you feel that a lot of people give the advice, take every gig possible, but sometimes those every gig possible, you get these crazy kind of situations that, you know what I'm saying? You're laughing.
Well, I think, what? At first, I think that's good. I'll add to this as we're talking. As I answer your question, I'll interject this. The other thing is to diversify. Like a financial portfolio, a financial advisor would say, "Hey, diversify your portfolio. If you put all your money in one place, you're not going to have that solid foundation." And in music, whatever your music gifts are, develop them. If you're a sax player, but if you can sing, or you can play piano, or you can do music charts or graphic design or websites or whatever your talents are, don't be one of those guys that's like, okay, if I'm not doing saxophone 24 hours a day, then I've sold out. No, I mean, really, you have to diversify. And so then in terms of that's critical. But taking the gigs, take the gigs, because you're going to learn as much from the bad situations or more than you will from the good situations. You might get in a good situation and, it might feel so good. You might all of a sudden feel entitled, like, wow, yeah, this is the way it's supposed to be, right? Well, if you set that expectation, I'm sorry to say, you're going to be horribly disappointed, because it's not like that in the music industry. I think we're in a service-oriented business where we serve others, and it's not about us. It's about bringing music to other people. And so being consistent, taking those gigs, and then once you build your repertoire, once you build your clientele, once you build your ability to earn, then you can start to be a little more selective, and you can start to kind of hone in on the areas that you think are where you want to go in your career. But starting out, I don't think most people can be that picky. I remember being. I'll give you one anecdotal experience. I remember being on a cover gig back in the day, and it was one of those 8 p.m. to 1 a.m. I mean, it was like a 4 or 5 hour gig, and I was hired, I was just blowing solos in a pop band and playing a few horn lines and melodies, and we were playing, and I think they called Brick House. And we're playing through the tune, and I mean, it's fun, it's a funky tune, whatever. But we're playing through the tune, and they point to me for a sax solo, and I'm playing a sax solo, and I'm looking at the guy like, I play for a minute or so, and then I look at him like I'm ready to wrap up, and he gives me the signal to keep going, and I kept going, and 10 minutes later he's going like this, he's trying to wind down the clock, and I don't have anything left to say, and my lips feel like they're going to fall off my face. And I remember in that moment, I said to myself, And I was I was a ways along in my career at that point, and I said to myself, okay, if he calls Skin Tight next, this is my last cover gig ever. And sure enough, he calls Skin Tight. And I remember coming home from that gig, and it was the middle of the night. I think it was a Saturday night, and I had a church gig the next morning. And the church gig paid better than the club gig, and I'm not going to get any sleep. And I just remember thinking to myself, okay, I think it's time for me to restructure what I'm doing. And so it wasn't hard feelings. It actually was more of a funny moment. But it was the moment that made me realize I had to diversify. And so I went home and I started strategically deciding, okay, I can write music charts in Finale. So I contacted musicians I knew. Hey, do you need your book charted out? I'll hire myself out to chart music. I started doing web design on the side. I started doing a variety of things, and I pushed harder into the songwriting and production as well. So, yeah, it was the moment that we say we don't want to be in it as a musician, but it was that very moment that really motivated me to figure out how I was going to make it in the industry.
That's a great story. I think a lot of us have gone through similar funny. It makes for great stories, right? It really does.
And I wasn't mad. It was funny, but I wasn't even mad about it, and I wasn't upset at the guy either. It was that moment where I realized, okay, it's time to figure out a smarter way to do this.
Yeah, and it's funny because you started talking about that defining moment for you. And you started talking about how, okay, now you're going to reach out, maybe chart some things for people and all that kind of stuff, write your own songs. So then taking that a little bit further, a lot of people or in the audience want to hear cover songs and whatnot. Did you form your own band? And if you did form your own band, did you just do originals or did you insert cover songs? The usual do cover songs and insert a few originals and that kind of thing.
Well, I think there's probably more money to be made in corporate and cover songs, but I knew that wasn't my calling. I didn't feel I enjoy good covers, and I usually include a couple of them in a long set. I'll include one or two of those, and I think that's good. People that are familiar with the songs, and sometimes they can identify with that better because they know it. But I've always been a big proponent of original music, and I feel like when I think about leaving a legacy in music, I think the best way for me to do that is to allow my personality to come through with songwriting too.
Absolutely. That's a great story to share. So let's talk about some of the albums that you have, but in particular, your latest one, which is called Hymns from the Heart. What was the inspiration behind that?
Well, I grew up doing gospel music, so that was always home base for me, and I love it. I mean, I genuinely have a passion in my heart for gospel and worship music, and not for the exploitation of the genre and not to make money, but just for the love of it. And so I spend so much time producing songs for radio and albums for people that are more commercial, and I love doing that. But I have rarely had the opportunity to just kind of do something that's really raw and unfiltered and like where it's just about, the melody and the saxophone. And so when I set out to do Hymns for the Heart, it was simply that I was gonna play piano and play saxophone, and I was gonna do it very simply, no production, no bells and whistles, and really allow the horn to kind of, be at the forefront.
Be the main star.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Now, you had also mentioned your work with Wayman Tisdale, the bassist,
Mm-hmm.
and you also, I think, on this new album, you have a piece dedicated to him. You want to talk about that?
Sure. Wayman was he was that door that opened that I never expected to open. I kept on going through small doors, and when the Wayman door came along, once again, it was through Dave Cause's record label. And when they offered me to produce this song for him, the circumstances in and of themselves were pretty small. I mean, it's, hey, here's a modest budget to do a song, and so I put my all into it and did it. And before I know it, the song's doing great on the charts, and Wayman is calling me back saying, "Hey man, I love it. Let's do more. Let's work on my next record." And so I cannot thank Wayman and Dave Koz enough for the opportunity. And I know many times they've credited me, I did this or that, but the truth is, without that opportunity, it would have never happened. And so I'm thankful to them. I'm thankful to God, and I just wanted to make sure that when that opportunity came along, that I was ready for it. And that's the big lesson is we as musicians put in all this time and we have our vision in our head of what things are supposed to be. But at the end of the day, are we prepared? Are we ready when that opportunity does come? Are we prepared? And if we are, I think there's a lot of opportunity for musicians out there. It just can't always be our way.
Well, let me ask you something. So you wanted to make sure you were prepared. What do you mean by that?
Well, for instance, when I left on the trip to LA, it was natural to say, okay, I'm going to go to LA. I'm going to meet this record label, and I've got my music. I burned it onto CDs so they can listen. I've got some biography material. Of course, I'm going to bring my saxophone. They may want me to pull out my horn and play for them and make sure that, I can, in real life, I can actually play. Right. So that's a thing. Those are things you would expect to be prepared for. But when I was leaving on the trip, I thought to myself, maybe I should bring my laptop and my little MIDI interface and my keyboard and my audio interface. You just never know. And so when I met with them that day, and they initially gave me the somewhat bad news that, hey, we love your album and we'd like to sign you, but we can't. Now I'm stuck in LA for a few days wondering what am I going to do. And literally the next morning they called me and they said, hey, we overnighted your record to Wayman and he loves it and he wants to meet you. So I kind of quietly went back to my hotel room, and they had mentioned it was Ain't No Stopping Us Now, and they had mentioned they wanted to do that remake. And so I went to my hotel room, and man, I struggled to bang it out on my laptop because my equipment was so old. My computer was crashing every 10 minutes and it was real slow, but I managed to work up about a 50 second clip of the intro of the song. And I had a meeting with them the next day, and I surprised them with a disc. It had the music on it, and they loved it. And they said, "This is it. We're going to hire you to do the tune," and that's a done deal. But I wanted to have my equipment with me, and I just want to be prepared for anything.
It's that again. It's such great advice. It's thinking, not only thinking ahead, but thinking outside the box. Thinking outside the box of what, could be happening. You were going to try to get signed by a record label, but you have all these other skills that you were talking about that you've developed, diversifying and being prepared with those just in case. It's always that just in case.
Yeah, and the other part of the just in case is adjusting your mindset and your ego accordingly, right? Because, when you've put in, 30 some odd years of your life into learning I was 30-something years old when that all happened, early 30s. But I had already put 20 years into the saxophone at that point. And so my ego would have liked to have said, hey, I really want the record deal. No, no thanks. Thanks for offering me this other stuff, but I'm interested in the record deal. The ego wants to say that, but I think to understand that longevity in music is best created by serving others. I think that's been key, at least for me. And in that moment, not just being ready, not just being prepared, not just having my laptop with me, but being willing to say, okay, this isn't really what I came here expecting. But yeah, sure, I'm willing to adjust my mindset to try something that I've never done before. And it was a gift. It was a gift the first time out. I had produced for some friends here in Denver. And I had produced my own material, but this was my first real big job offer for production outside of Denver. And, the first time, by God's grace, the thing goes number one, and all of a sudden I have a career. And if I had said no in that moment, or if I hadn't been prepared to produce, and people may not even know who Darren Rahn, the sax player, is. So I consider all of that a huge gift.
That's a great story. And again, really great advice there because, It's funny. I think in our society, it's there's that all or nothing type of mentality. It's like I have to do that and do that only because that's what I see, these people doing, or yeah, I just want to put out records and play smooth jazz cruises and all that kind of stuff. But there's a lot more involved with being a
Yeah.
full-time musician nowadays.
Sure, and I enjoy. I mean, make no mistake about it. Being able to do my own music and play saxophone, these are my favorite things. So, if I could, I shouldn't say if I could. Perhaps I could be doing that all the time, but it's also being smart and realistic about the industry of music. So as a solo artist, myself or anyone, we can have one song on the chart at any given time. You generally cannot have more than you're not going to promote two of your own songs at radio at one time. And so when we're looking at possibility for radio airplay and digital music royalties and writing and publishing and mechanical royalties, if we're just doing one thing, we're perhaps limiting our ability. If you're working with other people, even if you're not a producer, let's say you can write music and you've got your song on the radio, but you've written with two or three other artists and their songs are on the radio. Now your earning ability has gone up 3 or 4 times what you can do just as an artist. And so for me, it's the best of both worlds. I can have a song on the radio and potentially be earning royalties on that. And at the same time, I could have produced 3 or 4 or 5 other songs that are on the radio concurrently at the same time. So it increases your earning ability exponentially if you're willing to set your ego aside and work with other people and really kind of get into the whole vibe of teamwork.
And also, it's you're as you said it before, it's being strategic and it's maximizing your potential.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. If just being a solo artist and just having your own songs out there, I actually couldn't really tell you what that's like because my career has always been multifaceted. But I know some that are, and I know many of those that are struggling because, when things are hot in their career, it's great. But then when things slow down, they don't have income coming in. And once again, that's just some people. There are those that have, really crossed the line. But even them, you look at guys like Dave Koz or Warren Hill or Brian Culbertson, who they've all maintained great solo careers, but they've expanded business opportunities left and right for themselves, different festivals and cruises and all different situations. So I think, once again, that diversification, man, that's the stability. That's the foundation that'll keep you going.
Absolutely. And the sad thing about all this, and this is where I've been trying to lead to too, you've kind of learned this, I think, on your own, School of Hard Knocks, right? I mean, how many schools nowadays, you've got Berkeley and maybe USC Thornton in terms of like business and stuff like that. Yeah. But how many places are really talking about how to be in the music business? Because it's not just playing, it's like you said, it's diversification.
Yeah. I think that's one way. I think music education needs to start to change to reflect that because, for a student to go to a 4-year or 5-year music school and nowadays, what a good college, what does it cost? $20, $30, $40, $50,000 a year. Yeah. I mean, students are paying the price of in some areas the price of a house just to go to college. And so before they even get their first paying gig, they've amassed massive debt. And so I think schools like Berkeley are great because I think there needs to be more schools that model themselves that way. Now, here's music skills, but let's be realistic about who you are as a musician and how to hone those skills. So you're not going to sit in a practice room and just learn classical etudes for 5 years, which technically that's great. But unless you're one of the very few that gets, and I mean, let's be realistic on saxophone. I mean, you're going to be a saxophone. If you're doing that, you're going to have to be a college saxophone instructor. Like, that's the only place you're going to make a living doing that. And even so, you're probably going to have to diversify your skills to get a good job.
Absolutely. And again, this is such priceless advice because, and I think people need to keep hearing this because we get flashed images that are starkly, vastly different than what we're saying right now. But the reality is that you do have on periods, you have off periods, and even mentally and emotionally, those off
Sure.
periods can really affect you.
Yeah. Yeah. When you don't have stability underneath you, those off periods can get people real quick. I think the other part of that is reassessing what success looks like and trying not to place specific expectations on it. I think it's good to have goals. I think it's good to have dreams. I think even to talk about those or write them out, I think that's fine. But always be willing to go with the flow. It's going to be, more often than not, it's going to be that moment you never expected, and it's going to be a little different situation than you ever expected that's going to yield something that really opens the door for you. And so if you're really rigid in your thinking and you're unable to see yourself, if you're not able to adjust, I think that can really hold people back.
Absolutely. And again, I think it's funny with each person that interview, we have like a theme that seems to come across, and this one I think is diversification. And it's being strategic. And you've certainly done that. And, you've had such great success. And again, also going with one of the last things that you said, it's how you define success, because success doesn't have to mean, the stature of Gerald Albright, phenomenal player, or even the stature of Dave Koz. You look at guys like that, particularly Dave Koz, who also has his wine business, and he does the radio show on watercolors on Sunday mornings, and he does a whole bunch of other things. You're thinking ahead, just like you're doing the same thing. You've been doing the same thing, thinking ahead, being strategic, and that's the longevity of it. And that's being current also with the times as well.
Yeah, technology is huge. I would urge people to learn. You think you can't produce, but in today's day and age, even just the beginning parts of the songwriting portion of doing an album, if you can, if you know the basics of Cubase or Pro Tools or Logic, Digital Performer, Ableton, some program like that, and you can even start to ink out some of your ideas and flesh out some of your ideas, boy, it can save you so much. Budget, time is money and money is time, and the more you can get started with, even if you're going to have to hire someone, build those skills over time. No one is better equipped to bring your vision to life than you, if you have the skills. And so I think it's good to develop some of those skills. I've worked with several artists that came to me to do a record, and I said, I hope your next record, as much as I love working with you, hopefully you'll learn enough during this process that you might be able to produce your own next record. And if you can, it might save you a lot of money.
Yeah, and just wanted to ask you a question with regard to inking out stuff. You had mentioned before that you're also fluent with Finale. Do you use Finale for the notation, or do you put everything into a Pro Tools or Logic or something like that?
Well, so when I was doing the Finale charts that I was talking about, making a living charting for people, that was 20-ish years ago.
Oh, wow.
And so I was the early versions of Finale, which were very tedious. And actually the last 10, 12 years, I haven't used it at all. And it's funny, I just had talked to Jeff Koshawa, who is a chart writing whiz. And we were talking about Finale versus Sibelius. So I'm back into it now, but now with Sibelius, I think for the kind of rhythm section charts with kind of the slash notation combined with rhythmic, I find Sibelius a little easier. If I was doing orchestral and serious, like huge scores, I'd probably be using Finale. But I'll rechart everything from scratch in Sibelius right now, and I'm starting to convert my whole book right now to Sibelius for the bands, and then also that will give me the opportunity to release some sheet music to my fans who have been asking for sheet music for a long time. So once again, there's another revenue stream that's been untapped in my career. So songbooks, play-alongs, things like that.
That is definitely true, and that's awesome. That's great. Congratulations on thinking about that. And that's interesting. I know what you're talking about with Finale. I've used it for a long time. The earlier versions were very tedious. It's much easier to use now.
Yeah.
I tried using Sibelius maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and when you use Finale, it's hard to switch to Sibelius because it's just totally different.
They're different. They're both excellent, and they're both very different. And for me, being out of it for 12 years, enough had changed that I came back and I was demoing both programs, and I was starting from scratch. So I'm still demoing Finale. We'll see. We'll see if it grows back on me. I'm not sure.
That's really cool. Well, listen, this has been fantastic advice and tips. Now, what other projects besides the new album do you have coming up for you this year?
Well, I'm starting material on the new album, like you just mentioned, but I'm constantly working with other artists. Right now, I'm working with a number of young artists and newer artists. I just finished a single for a great young sax player named Riley Richard, and I think he's just creeping up on the Billboard chart now. Very, very talented sax player. I'm working on new music for guitarist Gregory Goodloe, a saxophonist in LA, Dante LaShawn Thomas. He's got some new material in the works, and I'm constantly collaborating with friends too, guys like Tim Bowman and Dave Cause and I just recently released a new song, and there's all kinds of stuff in the works.
Awesome, very cool. And can you tell us how to find you on the social medias?
Okay, very, very easy. As long as you can spell my name, it's very easy. It's DarrenRahn.com. That's DarrenRahn.com. And then all the major social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram /Darren Rahn, same spelling, and probably most active on Facebook.
Good. I was glad actually that you answered that because social media is a lot to deal with, and it can really, I'm going to say it can suck up so much of your time, and sure. It's probably best to focus on one. So you definitely focus on one. You have a Facebook music page, I'm sure.
Yep.
Terrific.
Yeah, and I'll announce my gigs and kind of what's happening and all that fun stuff.
Awesome. Listen, Darren, I know you're such a busy guy, and I so appreciate you spending the time with us and helping the listeners, all the great advice that you gave today. It was such a pleasure talking with you, not only today, but also after your show at Spaghettini's, and I hope to catch you again when you're in the LA area. It was really, folks, he puts on a great show. I'm not lying to you. I'm a New Yorker. I say it as it is. Okay? He puts on a great show.
Donna, thank you so much, and it was great to meet you at the show. What a pleasant surprise, and it's great to be on your show. Thank you for having me, and anytime.
Awesome, cool.
Happy to hang anytime.
Thank you.